I've sold this house to my parents. Let's get a divorce. I don't need you anymore. Phil pointed at me, urging me to leave the house quickly. After that, he continued to throw insulting words at me. My in-laws joined in, laughing along. However, I remained undisturbed by such comments and calmly accepted the need to leave. I had a plan. After quickly preparing my belongings, I left the house. Those three still didn't understand the true hardship that was about to unfold. My name is Rachel Wagner. I'm in my 50s. After many years of marriage, my children are already independent. Although I used to work as a regular office worker, I am now a teacher of handmade accessory making, a hobby of mine thanks to a friend's introduction. For me, getting this job was a stroke of luck. I enjoy my beloved craft, surrounded by kind and caring students. While some may frown upon continuing a hobby as a profession, I feel fortunate to be in such a wonderful environment. I met Phil at the company where I used to work. Although we were at different companies, frequent interactions due to business dealings led to a mutual attraction that led to dating and eventually marriage. 3 years after getting married, I gave birth to a healthy boy. He graduated from a top university and secured a job at a major company. He now lives with his very attractive wife. As a parent, I feel unparalleled joy. However, my daily life took a turn for the worse. Decades into our marriage, with our child out on his own, Phil's once gentle nature had vanished. "Hey, Rachel, isn't dinner ready yet?" Before I knew it, I was being treated like a convenient housekeeper, constantly ordered and directed. Worse yet, his demands changed daily. One day, he complained the soup was too strong, so I made it lighter the next day, only to be yelled at for it being too weak. Experimenting, I served the same taste every day, only to be constantly criticized for it being too strong or too weak. I had felt it before, but perhaps he was just amusing himself by troubling me. That thought was disappointing. How childish he seemed. No matter what I did, Phil would quickly become angry, frequently hurling disrespectful words at me. Living this way made me desperately want to leave, to escape from Phil at the earliest opportunity. I've thought about it countless times since he changed, but there's a reason I can't leave. It's because of an outstanding mortgage. Phil quit his job suddenly without reason and now spends his days idly at home. Despite this, he never helps with the housework. When I return from work, I find a floor littered with empty alcohol cans and snack wrappers. As a result, we're getting by on my earnings. In truth, we had just recently rebuilt our house. I provided all the funds for it. I keep the household account book, monitoring our financial situation. I've been diligently saving up, gathering funds for the house construction. I can't just leave the house I worked so hard to build. If I leave, it becomes Phil's. On top of the mortgage, there's another important reason. This house is a place filled with my hopes and dreams. The exterior, interior, and facilities were all designed according to my wishes. What I particularly like is the spaciousness of the kitchen. Our kitchen is very spacious, making it a comfortable environment for cooking. During meetings with the designer, Phil frequently interjected his opinions, but when I firmly said, "I'm providing the funds, so I'd like my wishes to be considered a bit," he fell silent. Months passed, and despite various difficulties, our house was finally completed. Not all my wishes could be met due to budget constraints, but still, our ideal home was built. I am very satisfied with the outcome. However, on the flip side, we ended up with a large mortgage due to going over budget. Having a substantial mortgage in my 50s is tough, but thinking about my dream home gives me strength. Despite it being a new home, Phil seemed dissatisfied that his opinions weren't much reflected. He complained, "This facility is unnecessary. It's a waste of money." But he gradually stopped grumbling when I ignored him. Instead, he started to leave trash around and deliberately dirtied the room. Was it out of spite? When will this situation improve? These thoughts weigh on me as I go through my days. A few months after building the house, the doorbell rang unexpectedly. There were no visitors scheduled for today. Who could it be? As I started to move slowly towards the entrance, Phil suddenly stood up as if he realized something and hurried toward the door. There was a sense of anticipation in his behavior. After a while, cheerful and lively conversation could be heard from the entrance, growing louder over time. When the living room door opened slowly, unexpected visitors were there. What? Father and mother. Yes, there stood my somewhat difficult-to-handle father-in-law, Henry, and mother-in-law, Debbie. When we first met, they had thrown demeaning words at me. At our wedding, they even complained about trivial things. Their interference continued afterward, causing me much distress. Recently, our contact had decreased, and I thought we had found some peace. But then this visit happened. Even though I politely said hello, they passed by as if I was air, deliberately bumping into my shoulder. Look, isn't this house wonderful? I want you to see various things here. Phil eagerly spoke. What a nice house. How happy one must be living in such a lovely place. The kitchen is so spacious and functional, exclaimed my mother-in-law. Indeed, it's enviable. I can see why you two would be comfortable here, praised my father-in-law. Phil showed them around the house, explaining features that piqued their interest. When they returned to the living room, there was a satisfied smile on my in-laws' faces. However, in contrast to the cheerful atmosphere, Phil scolded me loudly. Hey, aren't the coffee and snacks ready yet? How can you make my parents wait? Rushed by his angry voice, I hurried to prepare the coffee and snacks. But since there was no prior notice of the visit, I had to serve whatever snacks I had on hand. This made them upset. What kind of joke is this when your husband's parents are visiting? Really, always a petty woman. They expressed their dissatisfaction but finished all the coffee and snacks provided. This house seems really comfortable to live in. Dad and Mom, you're always welcome. Don't hesitate to come. After that, they left without saying thanks for the meal or anything else. Ultimately, their attention was solely on Phil, only glancing at me when expressing their complaints. After they left, I realized something. It had been a long time since I saw Phil laugh so brightly. From that day on, at Phil's invitation, they began visiting frequently. Initially, it was about twice a month, but gradually it increased to once a week, and eventually, they started coming almost daily. Most of what they said during their visits were complaints about me. Phil never defended me. He just nodded along with his parents' remarks. He even agreed with his parents' opinions and complained about me. Rachel really doesn't listen to what I say. It's troubling me. Rachel is really a high-maintenance person. I've felt it since we first met, but to see her troubling my son like this, I never intended to trouble them. In fact, I am the one who is troubled. Yet, I couldn't convey this and merely apologized. Their visits seemed to continue. I couldn't be sure because they visited when I wasn't around, and I didn't see them every day. Nevertheless, they seemed to drink alcohol during the day, and when I came home, empty cans were scattered on the floor. The newly bought rug had stains from spilled drinks. Could you at least clean up the empty cans? The new house smells of alcohol, and there are stains on the floor, which is troublesome. Quiet. You should just keep earning money in silence. Just do as I say, okay? Understand? Really now. It seemed he didn't realize who was earning the money for the alcohol. Besides alcohol, Phil also spent money on gambling. Occasionally, I would find crumpled betting tickets next to the alcohol cans. When I realized Phil was gambling, I tried to advise him. We didn't have financial leeway in the first place. If he continued to waste money on gambling, our situation would only worsen. It's one thing if it were his income, but using the money I earned, I feel more sadness than anger. Weeks have passed since his parents began visiting frequently. They would still come when I was not home. How should I turn this situation around? Sometimes when I came home early from work, I would find them brazenly using my home's facilities. I let out a surprised "ah," and when they noticed me, they clicked their tongues. My presence seemed to be an annoyance to them. Yet, this is my place. There's no reason for me to be treated as an unwanted presence. How should I overcome this difficult situation? I was already at my limit taking care of Phil, let alone dealing with his parents. Finally, I decided to confront Phil and his parents and began to formulate a plan. A few weeks later, they unusually visited while I was home. "Hello. It's rare for you to come when I'm here," I said sarcastically, and they gave me a sharp look. "If we knew you were here, we would have changed our visiting time. You always look so unremarkable." It was clear that my presence made them uncomfortable. They brushed past me and entered the living room confidently. "There you are. We've been waiting." Phil greeted his parents with a smile and led them to the kitchen. They seemed to think of this place as their home. In the kitchen, Debbie happily operated the equipment. "This kitchen is nice. I can't wait to use it. The food Mom makes here will surely be exquisite." After tinkering with the appliances, they said, "Let's check the bathroom next," and proceeded there. Inspecting the facilities of our house, which they had visited frequently, felt strange. It was as if they were doing a final check. With a look of anticipation, they left the house. "What were you doing? That's none of your business. Keep your mouth shut." Even when I asked what he had been up to, Phil told me nothing. But it doesn't matter if he doesn't tell me. The reason is that I was fully aware of what Phil and his parents were planning. Phil tried to keep his plan from me, but his attempts were so comical that I couldn't help but smirk when he wasn't looking. 1 week later, when I returned from work, a large truck was parked in front of our house. It had "Moving Center" written on its side. When I made eye contact with Phil standing next to the truck, he completely ignored me and went inside the house with the movers. Uncertain whether it was the right time to enter, I stood outside and watched just as his parents arrived. "Oh, you're already here, Dad. Quick, let's go inside." After a brief glance at me, my in-laws, treating me as if I were invisible, entered the house without exchanging any words with me. Minutes passed, and the movers left. The three of them watched the truck leave with satisfaction. Once the truck was out of sight, they turned their attention to me. "Oh, Rachel, you're back? We didn't notice at all." "Really? When did you get back?" Pretending to be innocent, they approached me. "We need to talk. Please, come inside." As I stepped in, I noticed that most of the furniture had been replaced with items from Phil's parents' house. My beloved shelves and desk were gone, likely taken away by the movers. Sitting on the newly replaced sofa, the three of them stared at me with an eerie smile. "We have an important discussion to make. You have no right to oppose now, so just listen quietly." An important talk. When I questioned back, Phil, with a sneering tone, said, "I've sold this house to my parents. Let's get a divorce. I don't need you anymore." As soon as he finished his sentence, his parents chimed in, "Exactly right. So, from today, you are a stranger to us. Strangers should leave promptly." Debbie's words were followed by Phil and Henry's laughter. "Did you hear that? You're a stranger, so get out." "Mom, that's really funny." "Yes, she's a stranger now, so she should leave quickly. This house is no longer yours." While saying this, Phil handed me the already filled out divorce papers. However, I wasn't fazed at all. I had anticipated all of this. "Understood. Then let's proceed with the divorce. I'll sign the divorce papers now." I signed quickly, placed my wedding ring on the table, stood up, and declared, "I will move out now." My calm demeanor seemed to dumbfound the remaining three. There's a solid reason why I could remain so composed. I had installed surveillance cameras all around the house. When his parents started visiting frequently and kept talking about living here, I grew suspicious. Their increasing visits and specific timings raised my doubts, making me suspect a conspiracy with Phil, which led me to install the cameras. At first, I hesitated. Is it permissible to monitor one's family like this? I feared that if nothing untoward was happening, I would be the one criticized. But, driven by daily stress, I finally decided to install the cameras. I could check the footage from these cameras on my smartphone at any time. Whenever I took a break, I started checking the footage. On the first day, there was no significant change. His parents visited, and they engaged in casual conversation with Phil. The focus of the conversation was Phil's daily grievances, and his parents just nodded sadly. "So you've been feeling that way. Truly, she is no good, causing her husband such distress." The video also captured their voices clearly. Have they forgotten who have been supporting the household? Since installing the cameras, I've been pondering how they will manage their living after I'm gone. Days later, the screen showed Phil and his parents in an unusually cheerful mood. What had happened? Listening carefully, it sounded like Phil was discussing selling his house to his parents. When I first heard this, I thought it was a joke, but the discussions about selling the house continued the next day, and the day after that. It became undeniable that Phil indeed intended to sell the house to his parents. His parents were enthusiastic about the plan, discussing various projects like buying new furniture and making the house barrier-free. After hearing these conversations, I secretly began looking for a new house. The surveillance footage recorded the mover's schedule and the divorce plans. I prepared to move to a new place in time for the day I would be driven out. I also initiated the process to change the name on the mortgage contract. Since the divorce was decided, the house was no longer mine. Therefore, I thought it appropriate to transfer the payment responsibility to Phil and his parents. The mortgage I was paying was $2,800 a month. I doubted they could afford it, but that was to be their problem after we get divorced. I intended to refuse any requests for financial assistance. Driven out from home, I headed to my new residence. New furniture was already arranged there, and I was ready to start a new life. Exhausted, I collapsed into bed and fell into a deep sleep. Luckily, the next day was a holiday. Relieved to have started a new life away from Phil, I slept longer than usual and woke up past noon. I couldn't recall the last time I slept so soundly since getting married. I was hungry but still felt sleepy. Just as I considered sleeping a bit more, the doorbell rang. When I responded, I saw an enraged Phil and his parents. What? Why are they here? I didn't recall sharing this address. How did they find this place? Without giving me time to wonder, they barged in. Then, they suddenly produced a document. What's this? A notice for changing the mortgage name? Yes, that's right. I no longer live in that house, and effectively, we are strangers. Even so, right after I moved, they received the notice for the mortgage name change. They seemed shocked by the amount. We have no income right now. How can we pay $2,800 a month? That's right. Our pension isn't that much. They pleaded as if it was all my fault. Beside them, Phil nodded as if agreeing. No matter how much they blamed me, the situation wouldn't change. Maybe the house was a bit luxurious, but it's true that we went over the budget. But who was it that neglected to seek information and lazed around every day? Moreover, they themselves were trying to forcefully acquire a house that belonged to someone else. Had they known the actual amount of the mortgage, they probably would have reconsidered. While I remained silent, Phil, visibly angry, crumpled the document and approached me. Just so you know, I have no intention of paying such an amount. Leaving those words behind, he threw the document onto the floor. His parents remained silent about the situation, seemingly unaware of what non-payment of the mortgage would entail. I hadn't expected adults to lack such basic knowledge. You're free to choose not to pay, but do you understand the consequences? You'll end up having to pay it anyway, won't you? They seemed to misunderstand that I would ultimately be responsible for the payment. So, I elaborated on the specific consequences of not paying the mortgage. In fact, if you don't pay, late fees will be added. That means you'll need to spend more than $2,800 each month. Do you understand? Is that some kind of joke? Unbelievable. You're the ones who are misunderstanding. Why don't you check the details yourself? After that, Henry encouraged Phil to verify, and Debbie showed a similar response. Seconds passed, and Phil's expression gradually turned serious as he started operating his smartphone. I can't believe this is happening. I told you the cost would increase if you delay. You can find this information online. The three of them stared at Phil's smartphone. Debbie was the first to speak up. We don't have any money. Oh, right. What about savings? What's happening with the division of assets? There are none. Since Phil hasn't been working and squandered everything on gambling, there are no assets left to divide. I stated this definitively, causing Phil's face to turn even paler. So, I recommend you give up and look for a job. It's a waste of time to linger here. What do you mean? We've been together for years. Don't you think you should help out a bit? Do you realize how much we've supported you? I had no memory of being supported. I couldn't recall any assistance from his parents. I haven't received any help. I communicated this clearly and understandably, but they kept pleading, trying to rebuild our familial relationship and revive our marriage. I found it bothersome to even engage with them anymore. I forced the noisy trio outside and called the police, reporting that there were loud people outside. I treated their complaints as if it was someone else's problem. Indeed, in reality, they were now strangers. As a result, they were taken away by the police for causing a disturbance outside my house. After the police inquiry, they decided they couldn't afford the mortgage for economic reasons and moved to a small apartment out of town. I heard they finally understood the importance of working and were striving to find jobs, though unsuccessfully. Phil, however, managed to find a part-time job and was barely supporting the two of them with his modest income. As for me, I'm busy with work, but started a blog about my handmade crafts, which has doubled my income. The blog has received a lot of positive feedback, and I've been getting more requests to teach at handcraft workshops. Now, I prioritize living an independent life over marriage. During this time, I found the household ledger from when I was living a frugal life. The memories. I felt a wave of nostalgia. Those challenging days are now a valuable experience. I vowed to seize happiness with my own hands and put the ledger away. I'm a little shocked that you would criticize my mother-in-law. If you're not working, why don't you get out of here? My sister-in-law and mother-in-law, who did not know that I was taking over my mother-in-law's debt, threw these words at me without the slightest sense of gratitude. Yes, I understand. But it's up to you guys from now on. The day I packed my bags, they realized a fact I had been hiding and put their heads together. My name is Emma. I am 32 years old, a busy career woman working in an office in the city. When I was a student, I spent most of my time in the corner of the library, absorbed in my books. After I got a job, I was buried under a mountain of work and forgot to take time for myself. One of my friends, who sincerely cared about me, said, "Emma, why don't you try to cherish your love life a little?" And she organized a group blind date for me. Then, a man whose eyes met mine was John, who worked in a building in the city center. He is a fresh salaryman working in a building in the city center. And to my surprise, he seemed to be a little interested in me. I was nervous about the feeling of dating after a long time, but supported by his kind words, we gradually opened our hearts to each other. Then he made a gentle confession to me, and our love accelerated. Only 1 year later, we decided to get married. It was like a dream come true that I, who had been so absorbed in my work, could stand at such a wonderful turning point in my life. My friend who organized the group blind date was also surprised at our sudden development. She said, "Oh, really? You're getting married?" I said, "Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? But it's great. I'm so glad I organized that group blind date. Thank you. I really appreciate it. I'm looking forward to the wedding. I'm looking forward to it." Thus, I was to open the door to a new life. First, we reported to each other's families. Seeing me so happy, my parents welcomed him warmly. "Emma, you haven't told me about your boyfriend for a long time, so I was a little worried that maybe you wouldn't get married. John, please take care of her from now on." When I heard these words, I felt as if I realized for the first time what my parents really thought of me. I realized that parents think a lot of things without saying them. My family had been basically free to do whatever I wanted, so there was no pressure to get married. But it seems that in my parents' mind, there was a wish to see their daughter happily married someday. Knowing such a parent's wish made my heart warm a little. And when I visited John's house for the first time, I met his family with nervous excitement. But his mother and father were both very warm and made me feel very safe. Next, we had dinner with the whole family. While I was looking forward to it, I was also a little nervous, especially because I had heard that John's sister, Melissa, was there. She was only 25 years old, and her choice of words was a little rough at times, which made me a little confused. She asked me, "Emma, you're already at that age. Weren't you getting married too late?" I was a little shocked to hear her say things like, "I would have decided sooner if I were you." But John followed up and we had a nice dinner afterwards. We then planned our wedding and had a happy wedding at a place we loved. We had a lot of friends and family there, and the day was really great. Our honeymoon was so much fun, and when we returned home, we started our new life together. Life together was fresh, and every day was so much fun. We went out on dates and watched movies at home. I felt that newlyweds are really happy. It has been about 2 years since we got married. One day, our peaceful everyday life changed drastically. We received the news that my father-in-law had passed away. Of course, I knew he had health problems, but I had not expected him to pass away so soon. My husband and I were deeply saddened by this sudden news. My mother-in-law's grief was especially deep, and I could feel her emotions as I looked at her. But our surprise was compounded by what we subsequently found out. In fact, my mother-in-law was in deep debt. It was apparently due to the fact that she had been cheated by some unscrupulous person and lost a large sum of money. When we learned of this fact, we could only gape. My husband, with his usual gentle nature, said he wanted to help her somehow. So, we decided to use our shared savings to reduce my mother-in-law's debt as much as possible. I thought it would be too hard for her to bear that heavy debt alone after my father-in-law's death. However, my mother-in-law's reaction was a little unexpected. She said something like, "If I am in trouble again, can I ask John for help?" My husband was a little surprised and replied, "That's a little." My mother-in-law said something positive, "But I'll find a way to get more money somehow." But my husband was worried. "I hope that's not gambling." We kept a watchful eye on my mother-in-law and were on the lookout for any trouble she might get herself into again. In the midst of all this, my husband was suddenly injured and had to be hospitalized. That event also became a big ordeal for my husband and me. Since every day was spent flitting back and forth from the hospital to take care of my husband, I never noticed any changes in my mother-in-law's daily routine. Then one day, after my husband was discharged from the hospital, I decided to pay a little visit to his parents' home. During our first reunion in a long time, I could sense that something had changed in the atmosphere. "Mom, long time no see." My husband greeted her with a smile, and my mother-in-law said, "John, you are getting better. Can you run again?" She smiled at him and said. While smiling at this exchange, my husband began to flip through my mother-in-law's bank book. To his surprise, the money in his mother-in-law's bank book, which we had accumulated after her previous debts had been repaid, was almost completely gone. "What's wrong with this bank book, Mother?" my husband exclaimed in surprise, to which his mother-in-law replied with a slightly embarrassed smile, "You know, I had tea with friends and found a nice little bag. And then I found myself in this mess." She laughed bitterly. With that one word, my husband and I froze in complete surprise. It was as if we had saved money for our mother-in-law's future, and she had spent it happily without a care in the world. My husband couldn't help but say, "Mom, you shouldn't spend it like this. Do you know how much we put our hearts into giving you money for your future?" He said something like that. Seeing my mother-in-law's remorse, we became truly concerned about her future. We suggested that she move in with us to support her life closer to us. When we broached the subject, my mother-in-law's eyes lit up with joy, and she gave up her house and moved into our apartment. Our new shared life together began, and my mother-in-law seemed to enjoy every day of it. The three of us laughed and talked around the table at every meal, and my mother-in-law volunteered to help with the housework, which made life surprisingly easy for both of us. Her upbeat mood was infectious, and our days became brighter and warmer. I said, "Mom, what would you like for lunch today?" I think I'll have Yuden. That sounds good. Since I was working remotely, I was in a position to monitor how my mother-in-law spent her money. Since my husband and I, provided her living expenses and my husband managed my mother-in-law's account, there was supposed to be no worry about her spending excessive money. However, we kept a close eye on her, worried that she might spend the money in some way. These days continued, and in no time at all, 6 months passed. One afternoon, while we were relaxing in the living room, the intercom rang. We wondered who it was, and when I answered, I found my sister-in-law, Melissa, standing there. I said, "Melissa, it's been a while. Is my mother there?" I was a little surprised to hear her ask such a question without even saying hello, but I showed her into the living room. "Mom, it's been a while." "Oh, Melissa, what brings you here?" "I just wanted to see your face once in a while." "Thanks, I'm glad you're here. How are you?" "Of course. I'm fine. John is with me." "So, do you want to go to lunch with me?" "Sure, let's go." Melissa must have taken my mother-in-law to a restaurant or something. We decided to wait at home. When they came home in the evening, we looked at them and their faces changed. Then Melissa said, "Emma, you are tormenting my mother, aren't you?" I was surprised and could not understand what she was saying. My mother-in-law also looked at me sternly. My husband said, "What are you talking about? There is no way Emma would do such a thing." He immediately took my side, but Melissa would not budge. "John is being deceived too. Mom says she can't go outside and she hears Emma is saying things inside the house." We could only be amazed. Indeed, there were times when my mother-in-law would ask to go shopping and we would refuse because she would waste money. Also, my mom said you were taking her money. I had to admit that this statement surprised me. Did my mother-in-law think so, or did Melissa blow it that way? In any case, it seemed that Melissa and my mother-in-law had joined together in accusing me. "Now, what do you want from me?" I was about to feel like I was bewitched by a fox. What on earth did they want to tell me? I wondered if they just wanted to say something to me. At that moment, my sister-in-law said something I never thought she would say. She said, "I want you to leave our house. I feel like my mother can't really live happily with you. Because I can't believe you treat my mother-in-law so coldly." Her face clouded over. My mother-in-law looked as if she wanted to say something and turned to me. "If you were gone, I would be able to relax and enjoy my time with John and Melissa." I was surprised by her words, but I could not say anything. In fact, they did not know that I had previously paid off her debts for my mother-in-law by cutting into my savings. Looking back, I probably should have made it clear to them at the time that I had not taken it out as our marital savings, but as my own. When I looked at my husband's face, he looked very angry. His hands were clenched and his body was shaking a little. Melissa said, "My mother and I are going to live here together from now on. So, I want you to leave," my sister-in-law said again. Taking a deep breath for a moment, I answered my sister-in-law, "I understand, but I won't get involved in what happens next." After that exchange, my husband and I decided to leave the house. And on the day we moved out, they were surprised to discover one truth. "Looks like you've made arrangements to move out right away after all." "Yes, I have something to tell Melissa." "Yes, what is it?" My husband chuckled and said, "Actually, I'm getting older and I was thinking that I should put the house in Melissa's name." My sister-in-law's eyes sparkled and she said, "Really? It's going to be my house?" she said excitedly. My husband quietly produced the documents for the change of name and said, "As long as you sign here, that's all right." My sister-in-law happily said, "I can't believe I have my own apartment," and signed it. My husband and I looked at each other stealthily and exchanged smiles at the success of our plan. "Well, it's time to start getting ready to leave." "What, John? Are you really leaving?" "Yes, I've decided to leave too." "Oh, even John is leaving? Do you really have to leave with Emma?" "If I'm not with Emma, I don't feel comfortable either." It's normal for married couples to be together. I knew you would say that, but then what are we going to do about future house expenses and stuff? That's something you'll have to devise and pay for on your own. Wait a minute. I quit my job because I believed you would support me, okay? My husband and I could not hide our surprise at my sister-in-law's sudden statement. If you keep this up, you're going to get me and our mother into a lot of trouble. That's fine if you can devise a way to live on your own. You have our mother's pension, and if you save a little, you can manage. Yes, and if you add my pension to that, we can manage. Since you're going to live here, we need to be creative about it. My sister-in-law looked a little satisfied with my mother-in-law's kind words. Indeed. It's my new home. If I save a little money, I should be able to get by. However, my husband and I laughed inwardly at my sister-in-law saying such a thing, not knowing that the property was a rental. About that time, the movers arrived. We welcomed them and began to move more and more stuff out. My sister-in-law and mother-in-law rolled their eyes at the sight. What are you doing? Getting ready to move out. Are you taking everything? Of course. We bought all this stuff. Do I have to buy everything new? That's right. I wish you had known that and acted accordingly. Well, we better get going. My husband smiled and said, and we left the house. My mother-in-law and sister-in-law froze in amazement for a while. After a while, my sister-in-law called my husband's cell phone. She said, "Hey, John, what's with the rent bill all of a sudden?" I was a little mistaken. Could it be that I am not the owner of this house? Who told you about that? Well, I'm actually renting this house. The document you signed at that time, which was the rental agreement. So, it's only natural that you should be charged for the rent. Seriously, I didn't know that at all. It's where you live, so you have to pay the rent. But my salary is not that much compared to you. You may laugh, but Emma actually makes more money than I do. Oh, no. It's true. She is working hard at a remote company that pays pretty well. That's why we were able to live so comfortably in that apartment. My sister-in-law was so surprised that she was speechless for a while. Next, I heard my mother-in-law's worried voice. "We're so sorry," she said. "I'm really sorry. Could you please reconsider and come back?" My husband responded gently but firmly. "Thank you, Mother. But it's hard for me to go back because of your attitude toward Emma. She is the most important to me. Please take care of the rest. You will take care of it." After that exchange, I heard various rumors. My sister-in-law and mother-in-law had apparently been forced to look for an apartment after getting tripped up on rent payments. They are now trying to make do in a small apartment that is barely big enough for the two of them to live in, but it is said that they are having financial problems and occasional fights. They are also concerned about the neighbors' eyes on them. John and I have started a new life in our new house. Every day is fun and full of